So thank you all again for being here. And the last panel was fantastic. I want to just give another shout out to Kelly and the panelists. You were also wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're all really great. And it's a great, that was the look back. And now we're going to do the look forward and try to talk about what's going to happen in the next 10 years and how we can make progress. What the strategies, what the policies will be. And we have a fantastic moderator for this panel, Bridget Schulte. We're really delighted to have her here. She is an author of a really wonderful book, which is called Overwhelmed: Work, Love, and Play When No One Has Time. Named one of the notable books of the year by both the Washington Post and NPR. And it really is a great perspective on our lives today. So she has spoken all over the world about these issues, and she is a real leader in reimagining the role of gender in our society. She is currently the director of the Good Life initiative at the nonpartisan think tank New America, and is also director of the Better Life Lab. So Bridget is she has a couple of clips that she wants to show to kind of intro the panel, which will be great to see. And I now give you Bridget.
Thank you so much. It's so exciting to be here. For nearly 17 years, I was a reporter at the Washington Post and wrote some of my best stories, I think, with the help of A Better Balance, and also Moms Rising, and lots of folks in this room. So I'm delighted to be here. So this is about looking forward. That was an amazing panel and talking about kind of how far we've come. So I have two things that I want to show. We're going to go a little bit further back than 10 years. But the reason that it will become pretty clear about why I want to show this, it's about the power of very traditional gender norms, because I think that we can't talk about how to move forward until we figure out how to address these. So this is a little clip that came out in the 1950s when these are your tax dollars at work. The US government wanted Rosie the Riveter to go home. So let's see if I can get this to work. This is...
The family was solidly founded on the father as patriarch and breadwinner, and on the mother as cook, housekeeper, and nurse of the children. One of the trends of modern life, which has been cited as most disruptive of marriage, is the increasing economic independence of women. Today, U.S. industry is employing hundreds of women who, before the war, were homemakers, devoting their full time to their families and their family responsibilities. Everywhere, children of working parents are being left without adequate supervision or restraint. Today, the woman with a position in business equal to a successful man's is economically able to terminate her marriage if she is so minded, since she is her own breadwinner. But are such women really better off?
Okay, so just a moment of a bit of context there. That video is called Modern Woman: The Lost Sex. All right, so now I want to fast forward just a little bit. This was to kind of show you how far we've come and kind of some really cool things that we're talking about, things that have changed. I don't think I would have. We were talking about 10 years ago. I don't think I would have seen a commercial like this. This was on recently during the Super Bowl.
We're gonna see how this hairdo comes out. If you're a father and you only have so many hours in the day, maybe doing their hair is one of the things that you can do to connect with them and to build that relationship. Sometimes the dad do is a redo, and you gotta be okay with that. All right, girl.
I love it.
Okay, so not like that I want this to be a commercial for Pantene. There, I just want to make sure you're not seeing my desktop. All right, so as Sherry mentioned, I'm Bridget Schulte, and 10 years ago, I would describe myself, I had 2 small kids. I was working full-time at the Washington Post, and despite my best intentions with my husband, we had slipped into very traditional gender roles. So I felt like I was burning my candle at both ends and out the middle, which is then what led to my book called Overwhelmed. But when I was thinking about, we were looking at what a good cover would be, an editor at the Post at the time said, "Oh, I've got the perfect idea." And I was like, "Yeah, what?" He said, "A woman with like shoulder pads and high heels in a grocery store with the grocery cart." And that's exactly what I said. What? So this is sort of part of what part of why I wanted to show that modern woman, the lost sex. This was not that long ago, and you still have a lot of people who still tend to think of gender equity, work-family issues, even economic and social justice issues through a very outdated lens. So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about. What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? What are the bright spots? And where do we go from here? So let me introduce this amazing panel. I'm so excited to be moderating. Here we've got Sherry Lewand. Okay. She is one of the co-founders of A Better Balance. She is currently serving as co-president. She has worked over many long, illustrious career working on paid sick days, paid family, discrimination, fair scheduling. She's been a professor, and last year she was awarded the Edith I. Spivak Award, named for a woman who is a pioneering lawyer and a role model for generations of women for her work championing women's rights. Very exciting. And next to her, we've got Jessica Gonzalez Rojas. She's the executive director at the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, which is the only national reproductive justice organization that specifically works to advance reproductive health and the rights for Latinas. So we're excited to have you here. And we have next to her Josh Levs. So thankfully, we've got a little testosterone to add to our estrogen here.
It's important.
It's
I'm
important.
glad to be here with my Y chromosome on.
There we go. So Josh, he's a former reporter for CNN and NPR, and he's the author of the new book, All In, How Our Work-First Culture Fails Dads, Families, and Businesses, and How We Can Fix It Together. And Josh has become quite a rock star on the speaking and the book tour circuit, really making the case for how men are critical for moving this conversation forward. So really excited to have you here.
Thank you.
And next to Josh, we've got Anna Shireen Wadia. She is part of the Inclusive Economies team at the Ford Foundation. Her grant making has focused on expanding access to unemployment insurance and ensuring that all workers earn family supporting wage and have access to paid sick and paid family leave. So we're really excited to have Anna here talking about the way forward. And finally, we've got Julie Cashin. She is a senior policy advisor at the Make It Work campaign and a fellow at the Century Foundation. And they've been working quite diligently and effectively on paid sick, paid family, all sorts of really great work, family, equity, inclusive economies kinds of issues. All right, so I'll sit down. So let's start off talking about the future and where we go from here. Sherry, let's start with you.
Okay.
So what's the way forward? What are some sticking points? What are some bright spots, and what are some real opportunities?
Well, I mean, I think listening to the last panel, I think we really do have a blueprint for a way forward. You heard a lot about inclusiveness. And I think inclusiveness is really important in 2 ways, both including issues around care and around work-family balance and enabling workers to care for their families, including that frame in all of the movements that are going forward now. And I think that, this panel is a fantastic panel because I think each one of these panelists can talk more specifically about their work. But I think that reproductive health, for example, broadening that frame to include the total control of when you're going to have a child, which includes both choosing not to have a child, but also choosing when to have a child and having the societal supports that one really needs in order to be able to do that, regardless of what your economic situation is. So I think that that's really a way forward for us that we think is really important. Including this frame also in the fight for equal pay and gender equality. You know, I think Joan Williams or Gloria Steinem, I don't remember who said that if women died at 30 and had no children, there would be equal pay in this country. And I think that's really true. I think the motherhood penalty that Ann Crittenden was talking about is is really the underlying basis of the equal pay problem in gender. And we need to recognize that, and we really need to bring that forward. The income inequality debate now that's now going on, and I so appreciate what Judith Warner said about not everybody sees that frame. We do in this room, but not everybody does, so we have to find many ways to talk about this issue. But one of them definitely is income inequality, and I think that remembering to talk about the ways in which the lack of benefits, the lack of sick leave, discrimination, and against women, and again, particularly against pregnant women and caregiving women, and the lack of paid family leave really makes it so that the income inequality problem in this country is exacerbated and really can't be solved. Those are essential issues. And I think in broadening the frame to bring more people in, family values is really an important thing to be talking about. And we have a project with Family Values at Work, which Carol was representing, to bring this issue into the LGBT community. Now that marriage is solved, what's the next step? What do we have to talk about? And one of the things we have to talk about is broadening the frame of what family means. And I think the idea of talking about family, talking about caring for each other as part of the underlying piece of this movement will bring more voices in. People, LGBTQ people, but also people who value family and understand what caring means. So I think there are a number of ways that we can really expand this movement, and I think that's what the real challenge is over the next 10 years, is to broaden us in terms of who's included, but also in terms of what issues are included. And you heard that also on the earlier panel. Economic justice issues like minimum wage and immigrants' rights. We need to be, that needs to be part of our movement as well, and the fight for equality of all genders and sexual orientation. So I think that those are the two points I would want to make going forward. Let's broaden our frame, and let's broaden our allies, and let's move forward together.
I love that, broadening the frame. You know, you talk about bringing in larger groups. There have been times when I've written about paid family leave, and one of the things that people don't realize is you talk to, say, a same-sex couple, and then you've got two guys who maybe have 1 day of paid family leave between them. You know, how is that fair? So I think that that's a really good point. Jessica, let's talk about that, broadening the coalition. Mm-hmm. You know, you represent the Latina, reproductive rights. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that's important to broaden that and how to do it?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Sherry said. The work that we do at the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health is really building power to advance the human right to reproductive health, dignity, and justice. And we use the word reproductive justice for a particular reason. Reproductive justice is a vision. It's not an action, it's a vision, right? We look towards attaining this. And it can only be attained when all people, and I underscore people because that includes women, men, trans people, young people, people of color, immigrants, so on and so forth. When all people have the economic, social, and political power and means, right? So having the power and then be able to execute that, to make decisions about our bodies, our sexuality, our health, our future, with dignity and self-determination. So it's a kind of loaded term, but it's really addressing a broader perspective on the issue. I sort of find myself in a really interesting position oftentimes because I'm a Latina reproductive justice organization, and movements are so siloed. So I joke that I sit in like the women's and the reproductive rights movement, and I'm like, what about Latinas? What about immigrants? What about queer people? And then I sit in the Latino civil rights movement and immigrant rights movement. I'm like, what about women? What about gender? So I think there's a really strong need to broaden that frame, and I think you're absolutely right about looking at immigrant rights, right? Looking at LGBTQ liberation, looking at addressing racism and the attacks on our children of color and our families of color in this country. So reproductive justice offers a frame that looks at the core conditions that impact people's lives. So we look at racism, we look at gender discrimination, we look at homophobia, poverty, xenophobia, environmental racism, transphobia, wage inequity, health disparities, the lack of quality education and childcare. So all those things need to be really integrated in the frame. And not all organizations and all leaders can do all things, but we have to come together because there's strength in numbers, and we're fighting powerful forces on the outside, right? Like, just look at this presidential election. There's a really extreme discourse that's happening that's attacking all these things that we're fighting for. And we need to come together and ensure a very unified movement. And in my experience, I feel like the work-family movement needs to actually address abortion. They need to say the word abortion. We can't be afraid of that word, because the majority of people in this country support abortion access. No matter how they feel about it personally, whether they personally would ever have one, there's actually a core sentiment, and we just came out with polling in the Latino community that Latinos and Latinas support access to abortion despite, without politicians interfering, that it should be a woman's decision. So, there's a really core value there, and it looks at the value of dignity, of justice, of health, of equity, right? All those things are important, and we can come together on those core values to become both a stronger movement, a more effective movement, and one in which we hopefully won't have to look 10 years, can maybe look 5 years. But we do need a long-term vision for our work. And what's front and center for me, because last week I was in front of the Supreme Court, there's a big case, a couple of big cases coming down and attacking every issue. I'm telling you, we were looking at abortion last week, and a couple of weeks we're looking at contraceptive access and religious discrimination. We're looking at voting rights. We're looking at immigration. I mean, this court in itself is handling a load of the work that we're all working on, and I think there's a really strong need to come together, not be afraid of talking about what does it mean to include undocumented people in this work-family conversation. We have to. We cannot let our domestic workers behind. We can't let people who don't have papers behind, because we all deserve a dignified future in this country.
All right, thanks so much, Jessica. So, Josh, we're talking about broadening the frame, and Jessica, you raised a lot of really great points that we all do need to get back to. This is the panel where we will be talking about politics and the national debate and sort of where we are as a culture. But Josh, let's talk about broadening the frame and bringing men into the conversation. And you can touch on those larger political issues if you'd like as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're saying what's the future? The future is reshaping our work culture so that businesses do better and the economy thrives more, and the inevitable way to do that, and the way that we must do that, is by embracing the reality of the modern family. And so when we put it in those terms, we will start to break down all these barriers. And in order to explain to you all how I know this, let me just give you a quick rundown of my background. I was a reporter on NPR for 10 years, then CNN for 10 years with Kelly. Hi, Kelly. And at CNN, I became this uber fact-checker guy. I was fact-checking all the political candidates. Both political parties drive me crazy. I want to be up there at the debates with like a buzzer every time someone lies. So I just started fact-checking all this stuff, and I learned how to see how many things we hear in popular culture and in the media are false, because people don't know how to read data. And ultimately, what I learned is how to actually read data, how to understand a real survey from a fake survey, how to learn things like representative sampling, and whatever. All these things then became something that I turned onto parenthood, because throughout all this, while I was doing this fact-checking, I became a dad, and everyone has dramatic stories with parenthood. We had extra dramatic stories. My first son, when he was born, we found out he needed major heart surgery, so he had a bypass operation. Turned out fine. My second son, my wife and he conspired to skip labor, so she fell to the floor of our bedroom, and he came out into my arms not breathing for a minute and a half. But I unraveled the umbilical cord, and he survived, and everything's fine. I know. So here's what's happened. Right? So these experiences left me, like after my first son, I had the same experience that almost all guys do, which is that I got obsessed with money. I was like, oh, gotta make money, because that was in me, or the instinct, or the social message, whatever, from youth. After my second kid was born into my arms and not breathing at first, I got this massive reality check. Like, whoa, I want to be there for every moment in life. Money, shmoney, what matters is being there. And I started looking for work-life balance. And then I started talking to other guys, my friends, who were also looking for work-life balance, and I started to find that we were having the same struggles, the same conversations. So then one year, for Father's Day, I decided, hey, how about if my segments on air this weekend will be me talking to a bunch of dads? So I taped segments with a bunch of dads. We aired those segments, talking about all sorts of things, what we want for our kids, just normal stuff. And the responses to those segments were ridiculously huge. Like, I heard from other media wanting to interview me about being a dad who interviews dads. And so the reason for this whole weird meta experience was that no one ever heard dads having normal conversations. And that's when I learned that the reality of what it is to be a father today is directly the opposite of what's in all these popular messages, including the fact that what you see in that Pantene ad is, like, sweet, but so what? Every guy does their daughter's hair. All of these things that you learn after a while are a reality check on what it is to be the modern family. So what I ended up exploring is all these issues on air. And so I started reporting the fact that men who live with our kids spend an average of 3 hours every workday. Working fathers spend an average of 3 hours every workday caring for their children. Men who live with their kids take care of them in almost every major category, several days a week or every day, and that includes dressing them and doing their hair. And so all these things that weren't getting out there. Then came the birth of my third daughter with the final drama, and then I'll pass this on. So here, my wife, it was just a terrible situation, but we realized that I would be needed to take time off for caregiving after the baby was born, which is totally normal. Guys do that. But this incredibly screwy rule at CNN had it so that anyone could get 10 paid weeks, except a man who impregnates his own wife. In that case, and in only that, like, so if I give up my daughter for adoption and another guy adopted her, he could get 10 paid weeks from the company. Or if I had a same-sex domestic partner and he adopted a baby, but I did not adopt his baby, I'm just living with him, I could still get 10 weeks to care for his baby, but I couldn't get it from my baby. So I ended up, the short version is I took legal action, everything is explained in the book, which is being sold in the back. But I explained, okay, so after I announced I was taking legal action, all these groups started supporting me, and I didn't understand. I was hearing from Maria Shriver and all these big groups, right? And I did Lean In organization, and that's when I came to understand that people saw my case as being this touchstone for what's wrong with our structures, because our structures still push women to stay home and push men to stay at work. And what I dig into in the book and in all these talks and everything is the fact that when you tackle this, it is proven on every level to be good for business. So now I reach out to Republicans, I reach out to conservatives, I reach out to businesses of every type, not just the tech industry. And I say, hey, when you make these little changes, you will make more money. It's better for business, and it's the ultimate family value, which is what we're talking about here. If you want to talk about family values, you have to actually value families. And you cannot value families without valuing fathers. So this big reality check that I found, because when I announced my case, all these guys came out of the woodwork sharing their stories with me, is that men want this too. And we really do want this. And so it's important to use inclusive language and to design these opportunities, like what I love about Better Balance. I love this group. And Moms Rising. I mean, just the way that they've talked about all this. And Make It Work campaign. It's very much a recognition that families are changing, and that what we're really talking about right now is what's best for the American family. And what's best for the family is always what's best for society, and it's proven to be what's best for the economy. So when we talk about what is the future, it's taking this message, ultimately what is a very simple message, better policies on the levels of the government and corporations that allow families to be who they are and allow workers to be the best possible workers. Those are proven to be the best possible thing for your business and for your children and for all of society. So why would you not do it? That is the future. That's the message to take forward. And when we leave here today, that's the message that we can all project with us. Thank you.
All right. Well, Josh, thank you.
Yeah, I'll shut up for a while.
That's really broadening the frame. Anna, let's go back to that sense of economic inequality. And then also look at the last panel talked about in the last 10 years where the most movement has been is at the state and city level. Can you talk about those two things, kind of broadening that frame, but then also broadening the location in terms of moving forward?
Sure. Well, thank you. First of all, I just want to join in congratulating Sherry and Dina and everybody else from A Better Balance on your 10-year anniversary. I have been on this journey with you all since almost the beginning, I think. And as you said, Bridget, there's just been this incredible momentum of victories at the state and local level on paid sick days and paid family leave and pregnancy accommodation. And those just would not have been possible without both the expertise and also the intense engagement and commitment of all the staff at A Better Balance. So I just want to thank you all for that. So let me just get to your first question about inequality. So many of you probably know that the Ford Foundation has been going through some strategic planning and kind of redirection and is really looking to addressing inequality as our North Star. This is what all of our work is going to be about. And these issues that we're talking about today, like paid sick days and paid family leave, are really key to doing that at a number of different levels. I mean, as the previous panel said, there is absolute inequality of access. So if you are in a professional job, higher income, most likely white, you probably have access to very good leave policies. Whether the culture allows you to take them or not is another question, but you have access to those policies. If you're Latino, for example, you are least likely to have access to paid sick days. So there's absolute inequality of access. But then what that does is that perpetuates inequality in the current generation. So that is the motherhood penalty, for example. That's also just this constant churning. So if you are a low-income woman of color whose child gets the flu and you have to stay home to take care of your child and you lose your job, you're constantly churning from one low-income job to another and can never get ahead. And then most tragically, the lack of these policies also perpetuates inequality across generations. And there's just, the last panel talked a little bit about the evidence around the impact of quality childcare on outcomes for children. And there's also a lot of data on the impact of paid family leave and the bonding of both the mother and the father with the child, and how important that is for that early brain development, and how important, even, there's data, I believe, that shows that fathers who are involved in their children's lives from the very beginning are much more likely to stay engaged with those kids, and so these are issues that impact inequality today and well into the future, and so are key to addressing inequality. In terms of the momentum at the state and local level, I think everyone in this room knows there's been just a slew of victories on paid sick days in cities around the country. We now have 3 states that have paid family and medical leave. We have several states, including New York State, on the cusp of having paid family and medical leave. And it is really this momentum at the state and local level that has brought these issues to the forefront nationally. And without the movement that Family Values at Work and A Better Balance and Moms Rising and National Partnership and all the other organizations have fueled over the last 10, 20 years, candidates wouldn't be discussing whose paid family leave plan is better. I mean, that is an amazing place to be at, even compared to 2 years ago. So it's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, all right. Thanks so much, Anna. All right, so Julie, So here we are. Let's talk about politics. It's the very first time in 2016 that paid family leave has come up in a presidential campaign, which is pretty abominable, but here we are. So talk a little bit about this kind of political moment and what's going on, and how do we, how do you seize it in terms of moving the issues forward? Do you stay at the state level? Do you move it nationally? Kind of, where do we go from here?
No, that's a great question. So I think the first point is that it's really important that these issues are talked about during the presidential election in order to set a baseline for making sure it happens. And so if you think back to the Family Medical Leave Act in 1993, it was the first piece of legislation that Bill Clinton signed into law when he became president. And why was that? Well, there was a lot of work that went into it beforehand, and Bush had vetoed it twice. So it was a great wedge issue for them in the campaign. It came up in the campaign and then became the very first thing, it helped him win and became the first thing. Similarly, when you think about President Obama, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act was the first piece of legislation he signed. It came up because McCain had opposed it as one of the Republicans in Congress, and it also became a wedge issue that also helped get votes and, became the first thing that he wanted to prioritize. So making sure that these issues are front and center as part of the campaign is absolutely necessary. It's not enough, but it's the baseline. And so that's what the Make It Work campaign is about, making sure that these issues, work family issues, caregiving issues, and equal pay are front and center in the election, and doing that in partnership with all of the groups who've set it up, who've had these victories, with the great work of Better Balance and others have done. Some of the ways we're doing it, just to kind of talk strategy, we are going to battleground states. So we were in Iowa, knocking on doors, and people were really relieved we weren't knocking on doors to talk about candidates, we were talking about what's going on in your life. And child care, work family issues, paid family leave, and unequal pay came up over and over again, and we were able to recruit a whole bunch of super volunteers or ambassadors who then held house parties, who then went to candidate events, because in Iowa you've got great access, and asked the questions. What would you do about this issue? What would you do about this issue? So we've got this great video of one of our ambassadors saying to Senator Rubio, you've got this paid family leave plan, but it seems like, it's good for business, but not good for families. And basically getting him to say, yes, it's optional. So, we're holding candidates accountable. This was somebody who had had a tough experience with paid family leave herself, could talk to the senator about her own story, and then try to push him on why would you have an optional plan when families need more than that. So really coming to people where they are, connecting with them directly, and doing the field work in battleground states to bring these issues up. And then the other piece of our work is around our communication strategy, where we're using kind of pop culture messengers, we're using humor and satire and social media to really reach a broad audience, and in some ways try to get it to, let's laugh about this, right? This is ridiculous, and let's not take it so seriously all the time. Let's have a place where we can kind of find the humor that gets us to our core values more than all about the policy side, because the core values are what speak to people and what move voters. And then another piece, because this is kind of my piece, is putting out big ideas. And so Make It Work put out a big child care policy that's really inclusive of low-income and middle-income families and caregivers, and really calls on big government solutions. So that language is not at all popular right now, but we are kind of working to it in terms of going through the values of why this is so important to families. And so, I think kind of holding candidates accountable about these issues, just one more quick fun one that folks might have heard. So one of the volunteers had asked Donald Trump about his position on child care. Actually 2 different times. Once he said, I could talk about that for 10 hours, little lady, essentially. It wasn't exactly that. And then the other was, well, that's easy. You need 1 or 2 people, a swing, and some blocks. And so, we do have a ways to go, but these can be pretty good wedge issues.
Wow. One or two people, some swing and some blocks. Yeah, that sort of reminds me of like back in the 80s when they were trying to put in some childcare standards for quality and safety. And I think Ronald Reagan said, "Oh, this is something that women and mothers have been doing for ages. We don't need anything like that. You don't need you don't need to know CPR or safe sleeping practices or any of those kinds of things." You know, in the last panel, the panelists brought up a couple different touch points that, you know, in their view had really moved things in the last 10 years, from the economy, the recession, you know, kind of changing the divine calling of motherhood, the important role of the Obama administration and politicians getting involved, technology, kind of breaking through different people's voices, kind of breaking through that wall of mainstream media. Changing demographics, millennials, or as we talk about workplace change, baby boomers who are retiring and don't want to work those 80-hour weeks anymore. What are the touch points now for the coming 10 years? You know, I'd like to open this up to the whole panel. Let's get your thoughts.
Policy-wise?
Policy, culture, pop culture. How do you move it forward? You know, I had the. You know, how powerful is Hollywood and television commercials? How powerful are the icons that we see in the movies and sitcoms? How powerful is politics? Do we stay at the state levels, city levels? Do you move to the national level? Kind of where do you go from here?
Can I say two quick things on that?
You can.
Okay,
You certainly can.
so I'll be quick, I promise. So first of all, you asked about before, do we want to go state by state or do we want to go national? And the answer is that we have to go national. We actually can't do paid family leave state by state because the overwhelming majority of states don't have a structure in place to collect money and distribute it, so there's just no way to do it. Like the state of Washington passed paid family leave years ago, and they still don't have it because they don't actually have a system in place. Only certain states already have systems in place that make it really doable. New York is one of those states, which is why New York, it's so obvious, should have it. New Hampshire's talking about it now, but they have to create a whole new structure. So what we need is a national structure, which is why it's so important to have these politicians talking about it. And we got to get Republicans to cross over the line too and join, you know, an understanding of what this actually is, what paid family leave is, and why it's benefiting states, and why it ultimately is a nonpartisan idea. The majority of Republicans want it. That's been proven in 2012 and 2016 surveys. So the support is there, but we need a few brave Republicans to be willing to say, okay, let's do it. Speaking of which, I did corner Marco Rubio in New Hampshire, because we've both been after him, and because he at least used the words paid family leave, right? And he did say he's willing to rethink it, and that he'll read the arguments that I have in my book. So who knows? Maybe. But so there's that. But also, you talk about the images in pop culture. A lot of the dads I interviewed said they think the number one thing to have is, oh, I'm so glad Bridget had it here, is add more ads like what we saw in Pantene. That ultimately the real source of the problem is in the pop culture image of moms and dads, because you still do see a lot of these suggestions that women are really the ones who are capable and dads can't change diapers and don't know what they're doing. And there are people who believe that stereotype, and the people who believe that stereotype maintain the policies in government and corporations. And that's been proven in this vicious cycle system where bosses and corporations raise up the ranks the few men who are like them, who don't prioritize their families. So when we break through that image and we start to show that women and men are equally capable at work and at home, then many people believe, and it makes sense, that a lot of the policy changes and structural changes and workplace culture changes that we need, like dropping of stigmas, will naturally result from that. So I do think that seeing more of these, you know, movies and TV shows doing the right thing is very promising.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for that. I think I totally agree with you on the need to change images on TV and where people actually get their kind of ideas about what life is really like in America. So I couldn't agree with you more. I do disagree though slightly that that we're not going to be able to get paid family leave in some of the other states. I mean, tomorrow I'm going up to testify in Connecticut. Are you going to? Oh, see you then. Because they're very close.
I live in Georgia. That's all. I can't get
Washington, yeah, well, Georgia, forgot.
Yeah, that's
but
okay.
although I mean, I do want to make that point as well. But Washington D.C. also, maybe not this year, maybe, but there is a groundswell. This has become such a popular issue that we are in a good economic climate, so there is some willingness to spend some state money to set up a new program. And so I do think that there is a future in the states, and that will push the national agenda, and I really think it's necessary. I think it has to come from the states because it has to be shown that it works. But bringing up Georgia is a really important point because I also think, and in the last 2 years, in terms of the movement forward for ABB, we opened a Southern office. And I remember hearing at a Ford Foundation panel, Maya Wiley saying, you can't forget about the South. And I think that's absolutely right. We're not going to get a national program in anything if we just forget about the voters in the South, but also the people in the South. And our office in the South, we have a wonderful attorney heading up that office and who's doing a lot of work in coalition building and representing workers there and public education to women in particular who don't even know what their rights are, as minimal as they are. There are some, and who are really happy to be able to talk about some of the issues that we're talking about here. And so giving people a forum in other states besides our blue states, besides our liberal and progressive cities, is, I think, essential for the move forward in the next 10 years.
Go ahead.
I was going to underscore the need for a culture shift. I think it's so critical to change hearts and minds and to undo the stigma and stereotypes that we've been operating for decades, right? Tom Perez, who's the Secretary of Labor, said an amazing quote. He's really good with his little quotes, by the way. Just follow him. He said, "We live in a modern family world with Leave Her to Beaver policies." I can't even get it out of my mouth. He's so good at it. He said it really quick. But that's true. We live in a society that has policies from the 1940s and 50s, and we live in such a different world. And there is the voices. There are the people at the forefront. And what's exciting, what I find really exciting, is how social media and kind of digital media has allowed for new, fresh voices, and particularly those of people of color, which has really, really reshaped a lot of the narratives around a lot of the issues that we work on. Again, I come from reproductive justice, and the voices of women of color and communities of color and trans people of color have just disrupted the narrative that we operate on. And it's so exciting to see that and see that flourish. And, you know, from people starting a blog, they start getting invited to CNN and MSNBC and right, getting those voices out there. I'm tragically sad that Melissa Harris Perry lost her show, or walked away from her show. I'll say she walked away intentionally because of things that were happening with the network. But her show gave voice to new, diverse, powerful, powerful voices that were disrupting the narrative. And we need more of that, and we need more people to be bold, right, and put new voices at the front of the media and uplift the discourse that's happening in the digital space and social media. So I think that's really important, and we'll see a culture shift that will change hearts and minds and allow the policies to follow.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about two other opportunities I see on the horizon. One is the impact of the age wave. You mentioned the baby boom generation. So we often, when we think about paid family and medical leave, we think about parents taking time off to care for their children, but it's equally covers people who are taking time off to care for an elderly or disabled or ill spouse or parent or other family member. And with the changing nature of the family and all parents in a household working, that is changing the way moms and dads are thinking about caring for children and balancing work and family, but also increasingly, I think with elder care, even though it still is a lot on the women's shoulders, men are very engaged, even if it's on the side of kind of some more of the managing of a elderly parent's affairs or something. And so I think that is going to help tip the scales, as pretty much every worker is now also a caregiver. You know, that was always an artificial split, but you can't make that split anymore. And then I do think that there is a new enthusiasm and excitement around childcare, as was discussed earlier. And so I really think we need to think about a caregiving continuum that starts with paid family and medical leave includes quality early child care and education, includes paid family and medical leave on the other end for older adults, and also includes long-term care insurance. And that those are all part of a spectrum that, that we have to fight for together. And your boss, Anne Marie Slaughter, and I, Jen Poo, call that the care infrastructure. So I think that's a really important way to think about it. And then the other opportunity that I see is we've talked a lot about the changing nature of the family, but at the same time, the nature of work is changing, mostly in ways that are not very helpful to workers as people become increasingly contingent, part-time, gig economy, subcontracted, but it is starting a dialogue about the need for universal portable benefits. And so whenever anybody comes to me as a funder and says, oh, I've got this great plan for universal portable benefits, that's the new thing, I was like, yeah, you know, family and medical leave insurance is a universal portable benefit. You know, and so I think we need to start talking about it in that way, and also make sure that the policies are designed in such a way that it is easily accessible for people who are in and out of kind of formal employment relationships.
I would just add two quick things. I very much agree with everything that was said. I think on the, I think the culture change is really important, and I think that we do need to see more and more. And I remember asking someone, you know, what do you think may tip the scales on marriage equality? And I think it was clearly a lot of factors, but this person said, I think it was a TV show, Glee. And, you know, I think there's something to that, right? There's probably a much bigger study there, but I think we do need to see more and more, you know, in popular culture of you know, all sorts of families and all sorts of parents who are both working and parenting. And I just think of, you know, the most recent specific show about that was that Up All Night with Christina Applegate, and it didn't, I don't think it did a great job for the movement. And I think there are lots of opportunities there. And on the national state side, I think we absolutely need both. I think that the national fights need to be able to point to state solutions, you know, to be able to say California's had paid family leave for 10 years and it's been successful and businesses are, you know, doing great, and say that it's, you know, had a positive impact or a neutral one, that is huge. And then to be able to say, and in New Jersey, and in Rhode Island. So you need all of that in order to win on the national level. Not to mention that those state fights build coalitions that then become part of the national fight as well, and that's also hugely important.
All right, well, this is great. And I know a lot of people with caregiving in mind, as we value caregiving, have a hard stop at 5. So we have we can open it up for a few questions. And if anyone else has some thoughts about moving forward, how do we build this care infrastructure? How do we value care? Yeah.
What has struck me, my name's Minna Elias, and I'm Congresswoman Maloney's senior chief of staff. So these are issues that we work on all the time. What I've noticed in the campaign is that none of the moderators are asking questions about the issues that affect people's families the most, and the way we work. And so I'm wondering, how do we actually get these issues into the dialogue? Because, you know, Family and Medical Leave Act was part of the Clinton campaign. We also had the Ledbetter Act, as you said, as part of the Obama campaign. Those were the issues that were at the forefront, and it forced them to sign those bills first. I can't think of what the issue is this year, or what the bill is that the new president would sign first that helps women and families.
Well, they are talking paid family leave. I mean, the two Democrats are talking paid family leave. And if it becomes either one of them versus Donald Trump, I can absolutely imagine that either one of them, whether it's Hillary or Bernie, would talk about paid family leave and continue to talk about paid family leave. I mean, really, the only difference between the two of them right now is how to pay for it. So I do think that has national. And you're also right that, you know, maybe you should make Kelly go back to CNN with some messages about, you know, Anderson. Yeah, well, that's the other thing. There's a debate every other night. Yeah, but I mean, this is also why we've been doing retail politics. This is why, like, I've spent all this time in New Hampshire, and her campaign has been also working hard to corner the candidates. Because when you go to these early battleground states, you have ridiculous access to the candidates. So we corner them there, we take videos, we put them up on YouTube. But you're right, it doesn't have a power of one of those viral moments from a televised debate.
And I mean, we have had, and others too, have had some, efforts, social media efforts to push the moderators on these questions. And there have been some, I mean, equal pay and minimum wage have been asked at some of the Republican debates. And what's interesting is sort of what kind of pivots you get there, So when the question about equal pay was asked, I believe most of the answer was about, all the women in poverty under Obama. So there's no comfort in saying like equal pay is not important because people know that that's really important to voters. But there's just, let's just shift the conversation. So it's asking the question, but also figuring out how do you get a real answer or how do you demonstrate that the answer is really not about the question in some important way.
All right, how about one more question, and then what I'd like to ask the panelists is if they have a call to action to end with that, kind of how you want people to leave the room. So one last question? Yeah, Spenta.
I was wondering if any of the panelists would address something. I had a situation, or a friend of mine told me about a situation recently in terms of educating. I mean, everybody here already knows what the issues are and thinks the same. Not only just bringing men to it, but educating other women. And by that I'm saying a friend of mine who's a very good friend who I gave Anne Marie's Slaughter's book to, read it, and she's at this panel conference where it's all cardiologists, okay? She works for a lobbying group. And two of the men on the panel started talking, one older and one younger, about flex stuff they do at their office because exactly for the reasons that everybody up here knows and Josh was saying, it's good for business. You're going to get more productivity, whether it's caring for family, to go with the soccer game, to whatever, or I take care of a parent, or just, I'm single, I want some time to myself, whatever it is, right? And she said a woman got up, an older woman, stood up and said, well, it interrupted and basically said that, oh, there's a separate panel on this in the next time. But she couldn't do anything about it because this is someone who gives her funding, so she couldn't call her out on it and embarrass her or whatever. And she didn't. I said, so what did you do? She said, I told her about Anne Marie's book and told her, suggested she read it in a very nice way. But and so she was just like, she couldn't believe that this was being thwarted by somebody in that sense. And I wanted to see. I mean, we talk about public opinion and media and stuff like that, pop culture. But what to do to change that dialogue when you're in it and you have other.
So winning over like people of other mindsets, right? Well, I mean, look, the chief message to take away is that proven, right? All the things we're talking about are proven better for businesses big and small, proven better for the economy, proven better for families. So there's really nothing to debate about. And when you start to tell people that, when you show people, like Bridget's reported on this, I have the vast majority of Americans want these changes. And it's true across political lines and racial lines and socioeconomic lines. So all of a sudden you have all this fuel to be able to say, no, actually people really want this. And what we're up against is structures that were created in the Mad Men era. So now it's up to us to fix this so that our children are not in the same situation that we are in. I mean, look, I grew up listening to Free to Be You and Me. Anybody heard that? Okay. So now, and then we got to the workplace, and we realized the workplace didn't grow up. The workplace is still stuck in the 50s. So all we're talking about here is fixing it now so that our kids don't have to continue it. And when I use those kinds of words, all of a sudden, all these other differences disappear, and people are willing to hear it.
And it's also really important for businesses to share that message with other businesses, so business owners and business leaders. And so there are a number of groups that organize small businesses, for example, that have come on board on these campaigns and have business owners who are spreading these messages, which is really important.
And just to add one quick thing on that, it's also important that the message is about that this needs to be a minimum national standard, because if you talk about how great it is for business, then people are like, oh, great, so businesses will just do it. And they will if they're Google, right? But the majority can't. And so that means low-wage workers are being left behind. And so it needs to be about the national standard. That has to be part of that conversation.
All right, well, thank you so much to this great panel. Wonderful movement forward. Any last call to action?
Vote.
So, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Thank you to all the panelists. I just want to thank the ABB staff and a special shout out to Rachel Sika, who did so much of this organizing. But before you leave, I want to say that I hope this will inspire people to be part of our movement, and you can start immediately. If you look at the back of your program, you will see 3 things you can do immediately to help us move paid family leave in New York. One of them is to call your state senator, like right now, and let him know that paid family leave is really important to you. All the information's on the back of your program. The second thing is you can stop by our advocacy table over on that side of the room if you have a story you'd like to share with us that we can use. And finally, please follow us on Facebook and Twitter to see what's going on with this movement. And also go to our website. We have lots of information. We have a benefit on May 2nd, which I hope you'll support. And mostly stay in touch with us and keep apprised of what's going on. Thank you so much for coming.